So I have a video planned this week for The Exorcist and its production and how insane it was, right? Because we all know a little bit about it here and there, but I've been reading more and more about The Exorcist and its production, and it was a hell of a production. But I said to myself, before we get into that, we have to discuss the origins of this film. Where did it come from? What was it inspired by? So that's what we're doing here today. We're talking about the book that inspired it all and the case that inspired that book, which is William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, and the real life case which involved the pseudonym Roland Doe, which was the 14-year-old boy that the book was inspired by. So let's get into all of this. Hit that subscribe button, notification bell. We're going to be talking about The Exorcist all week, and this is a new segment that we are doing now where we're going to talk about a movie, its production, and its origin. I always think it's so interesting to go into that and know a little bit more about it. So this was apparently about a boy who was possessed in Maryland, and then they were documenting the exorcisms that happened, and we're going to be reading some of this from a Washington Post article, which says that the boy had been freed by a Catholic priest by the possession of the devil. And this actually happened after several exorcisms came, and according to the documents and stuff like that, it was all after an aunt had died in the family. So this apparently all happened in 1949, and according to the accounts from author Thomas B. Allen, after Aunt Harriet's death, the family started to experience strange noises, furniture started moving on its own, objects started flying around, and levitation occurred anytime that the boy was nearby. So a lot of these things are things that we now normally see in possession films, and of course in The Exorcist we saw this as well. They contacted a pastor who then contacted a Catholic priest because they said there was an exorcism that needed to be conducted, which did happen, but it ultimately proved not to work as they were able to pull out of the restraints and attack the priest as well. So of course, like I'm saying, we're going back and seeing a lot of these things are very big things in possession films and The Exorcist, of course. And Peter Blatty apparently heard this story while he was in college when a professor started to talk about it. And then he got the idea to turn this into a novel. And the novel didn't do so hot at the beginning either when it first released. It wasn't until he went on a show and talked more about it and sort of the skepticism that revolved around the case itself. And that's when people really got interested. And of course, then it got picked up and turned into a screenplay for the film The Exorcist. But that's for a whole other video that we're doing later this week, where we'll talk about what almost was the Exorcist movie, because there are several actors that almost got put into this film, and directors as well, which would have made it a very, very different film from what we see today. But we'll talk about that in the other video. So apparently the family, after the initial exorcisms, they moved, but then they had to do an exorcism again. And apparently this is where we saw more of these situations happen, where the person was speaking in tongues and they were using a guttural voice to speak, and apparently things started shaking all over the room. And of course, like I said, we see this in a lot of possession films nowadays. Ultimately, they were able to sort of have the exorcism, the final one, be successful, and the person went on to live a rather ordinary life, they say. So that was the possession that sort of inspired William Peter Blatty to write the Exorcist novel. And of course, William did change some things around, locations and everything else about the case. And this has been a case that has sort of been studied around, and skeptics of course have discussed it and what they believe is real and what they believe isn't. And it has also spawned a movie in 2000 which apparently is closer to the story, which is called Possessed, and apparently there's also a documentary about it as well. But I thought it was such a fascinating thing to go back into and look at this, because we always see The Exorcist as this sort of pillar of horror. Some call it the scariest movie of all time. I definitely think it's one of the greatest horror movies of all time as well, because it just has it all. It has a great story. It has a great horrific element to it. It's a tragedy at its core. And a lot of the things that William Peter Blatty added to the novel, like Father Karras' story as well, is so great, and it really brings it all full circle. William Peter Blatty could have just gone on and done the average like retelling of this haunting, but instead added that element to it, which makes it a different take, right? So I'm very curious about what you think, if you've ever heard about this real life case of Roland Doe. That is the pseudonym, of course, of the person who this is based on. And I just wanted to sort of talk about that because it's important to talk about that aspect of The Exorcist, because it's pretty much what spawned the film. before we really start diving into it, get that information out to you. But I do want to talk more about other films as well, so stay tuned for that. So William Peter Blatty apparently also got the idea to do this book after watching Rosemary's Baby, and apparently he wanted to write a story sort of similar like that. He says that he liked how the director kept the audience unsure whether the title's character's concerns for her unborn child were genuine or not, but didn't really like the ending to it, so he wanted to go ahead and write a story almost similar to that. And so the show that Blatty ultimately went on that captivated audience was the Dick Cavett Show, where there was a discussion on whether or not the devil existed. And after this whole thing happened, that's when the novel went up to the New York Times bestsellers list. But we'll get into the production and everything and how Blatty sort of went over the studios and wanted his vision to be told in a certain way, and how he sort of was the one that brought Friedkin on board, even when the studios were not really looking at Friedkin to make the film. So we'll talk all about that in the following video on Friday, so make sure you're subscribed and stay tuned for that. But let me know what you think about the origins of The Exorcist and William Peter Blatty's novel. Have you read the novel itself? I haven't read the novel. I do want to get into reading this novel because I've heard it has a lot more subplots and a lot more detail than the movie, which of course is always the case with the books, right? And I will definitely want to get into reading that, especially right now with spooky season, so stay tuned for that. But let me know what you think about this and the Exorcist film, if it's one of your favorite movies or not. Anyways, as always, let me know if there's other films that you want me to do deep dives into the future. I do have already like 5 I'm going to be doing, but this is a series I want to continue on, not just for spooky season. It doesn't just have to be horror movies, it can be other movies out there, because there's so many great stories to all of these films, and ultimately how they come into conception for a writer and the director and all the stories that come with it and the things in production. So if there's movies in general you want me to talk about, please leave them below and I'll try to see which ones I'll do. But right now I think I have a pretty good selection to get us all the way to the end of the year, but I'm definitely still looking for other ones, maybe bonus episodes, things like that. And this might become something that I move on to something else over time, so stay tuned for that, because there's a lot of things I want to start doing, and there's some things that I'm going to be changing around the channel, so stay tuned because it's going to be good. I will be talking more about The Exorcist later this week. Check out our Terrifier 3 video as well as our other videos we're going to be uploading, and I'll see all of you next time on the road to 35,000 subscribers. Let's get to it. As always, stay safe, stay positive.